Friends, in our previous video, we discussed Archer Aviation and the massive opportunity that flying taxis could create. If you haven't watched that video yet, I highly recommend watching it first because today's discussion builds on that foundation. When you start peeling back the layers one by one, a very different picture begins to emerge. Whenever people talk about the future of eVTOL, one company keeps coming up again and again. Yes, that's Joby Aviation. In fact, if you follow industry reports, investor discussions, or aviation experts, Joby's name keeps on popping up because many industry observers see it as one of the companies closest to turning the vision into reality. So, friends, today instead of asking whether flying taxis are possible or not, we are asking a different question. And trust me, the answer isn't as straightforward as it might seem. Is Joby Aviation becoming the benchmark for the entire eVTOL industry? So let us start with section one, which is Archer sells the future. Joby is trying to build the system. Friends, one of the biggest mistakes investors make is comparing eVTOL companies like they compare some car companies. They will look at the speed, range, battery technology, aircraft design, but that's not necessarily where the real competition is. Because at the end of the day, the aircraft is only one piece of the puzzle. For example, imagine two people opening a food delivery business. One builds an excellent kitchen, the other builds the kitchen, delivery network, customer app, payment system, and logistics chain. So, friends, tell me which business is harder to replicate? Well, as the saying goes, the whole is greater than the sum of its part. So, here Joby appears to be focused not only on the aircraft but also building an ecosystem around urban air mobility. In other words, it's trying to connect all the dots rather than solving just one problem. And that changes how we should think about the company. The question isn't that can Joby build an aircraft? It will do, definitely. But the question is, can Joby create a transportation network? And that's where, friends, the rubber meets the road. This is a much bigger challenge, but potentially a much bigger opportunity too. And here's an interesting twist. Being first sounds great on papers, but history has a funny way of challenging that assumption. The first mover advantage trap. Investors love hearing the phrase first mover advantage, but history tells us more complicated story. If there is one lesson market teaches again and again, it's this. The first social network wasn't Facebook. The first smartphone wasn't the iPhone. And the first search engine wasn't Google. So being first gets attention 100%. But staying ahead is an entirely different ballgame. Execution creates dominance, and Joby has spent years developing its technology and pursuing certification milestones. But investors should remember something important. The market does not reward efforts. It sounds harsh, but that's how capitalism works. It rewards the result. And this is where many retail investors become emotionally attached. They see years of hard work and assume that success is guaranteed. But unfortunately, business doesn't work like that. And that's where an old saying comes to my mind: the proof of the pudding is in the eating. In short, execution remains the final exam, and sooner or later, every company has to face that reality, regardless of who started first. But real game changes from here. Here's why many investors miss the forest for the trees. Because the biggest challenge may not be the technology, it may be human behavior. Now let's see, would people actually use flying taxis? This question many investors completely ignore. Let's assume the technology works. For the sake of argument, let's give the technology every benefit of doubt. Let's assume certification happens and let's assume the aircraft is safe. And now comes the $1 million question. Will enough people use it? So, to answer that, let us see the history. History shows that breakthrough technologies don't become mainstream overnight. People need trust, which cannot be built overnight. So, change of habits, convenience, affordability, these also matter a lot. When ride sharing app first appeared, many people were hesitant. Today, they are normal. But what once seemed unusual now feels second nature. And friends, the same journey could happen with the air mobility industry as well, or it could take much longer than investors expect. But friends, this isn't a technology risk. It's a classic case of market adoption risk. See, innovation can move fast, but human behavior usually doesn't. And sometimes adoption takes longer than innovation. And this is where the conversation often comes full circle. Because no matter how impressive the technology looks, eventually the numbers have to make sense. Now, let's test the business model. Friends, whenever I study innovative companies, I ask one simple question. Everything else is secondary. Okay. Can this eventually become a profitable business or not? Not tomorrow, not next quarter, eventually. Because sooner or later, every business has to stand on its own feet. Many revolutionary technologies failed because the economics never worked. Customer loved them, but loving a product and building a profitable business are two different things. So investor lost the money. So guys, Joby's long-term success will depend on whether it can create a transportation service that customers value and that generates sustainable economics. That's why focusing only on aircraft specifications can be misleading. That's a bit like judging a restaurant solely by its menu without looking at the actual business. A business succeeds when technology, operations, customer demand, and economics align together. In short, miss one of those pieces and the story changes completely. And that's when the investment thesis start to unveil. So, what makes Joby Aviation different from many other eVTOL companies? Let's connect the dots. First, it's trying to build more than an aircraft. It's trying to build a transportation ecosystem. And that's a significant bigger ambition. Second, being early creates opportunity, but it doesn't guarantee victory. History has shown that being early and winning are not always the same thing. Third, adoption and economics may matter just as much as technology because technology alone rarely determines the outcome. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson. If there's one takeaway from today's analysis, it's this that investors often fall in love with the story, but markets eventually reward execution. And in the long run, execution is what separates vision from reality. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts between Archer Aviation and Joby Aviation. Which company do you think has the stronger and long term strategy? Comment below. And if you haven't watched our Archer Aviation analysis yet, watch this video next because it provides the perfect comparison to today's discussion. Thank you for watching, and I see you in the next one.